So, Kris. Kris Dreamer, the only human in hometown. Toriel and Asgore's adopted child, sibling to the most character of all time. Hero of the legend, blue, and, best of all, most importantly, possessed! It's no secret that Deltarune is building up to something big when it comes to freedom. Both freedom in general and Kris's freedom specifically. A little less discussed, but still very much so discussed, don't get me wrong, is also the theme of identity. These two themes overlap and clash with each other in Deltarune's narrative, and I have no doubt that they will evolve together even more over the next chapters. Our very first introduction to the horrors of identity, choices, and freedom comes within the very first 5 minutes of the game. Before you meet anyone else, do or see anything else, you build your ideal vessel, your ideal body, your ideal personality and mind. The game double checks that you accept every single part of it. And your wonderful, wonderful creation, this beautiful you, is immediately thrown to the trash where it belongs. Woohoo! Coming with this shock is a sentence that will haunt the rest of the story. No one can choose who they are in this world. Your name is... The first time you meet Kris is also the first time a choice has been stolen from you. This is not a coincidence. It's powerful because it reinforces the your choices don't matter narrative in both ways. That not only do the player's choices not matter, but that Kris's don't either. You don't get to choose who you are and what happens to you, and neither does Kris. And of course, this is one of the very first times that a clear divide is shown between the player and Kris. They are not your vessel. They are not you. You don't get to pick their personality. You don't get to control what they look like. You can't even pick their name. And to put it quite simply, I mean, if you don't get to choose Kris's name, why the fuck would you get to choose their fucking gender? Kris's gender is a bit of a point of contention, I guess, in some parts of the fandom. It baffles me, honestly, how people can play through the whole game and still not see that Kris is not meant to be a self-insert for the player. And it frustrates me a bit, I'll be honest. To anyone who enjoys Kris's possession narrative while still believing their gender is for the player to decide, first of all, I did not expect you to be watching this, and I genuinely thank you for giving this video a chance. Second off, I'm sorry for if and when my frustration boils over, and I make generalizing or mean statements about your side of the argument. I will say right here and right now, though, that I do believe with my full chest that Kris is deliberately non-binary and that is significant, and I will be referring to them as such throughout the video. If anyone wants a video more about the debate of it actually being canon, I recommend Tiger Bear's Are They Non-Binary video, which is a great watch. This one, though, is not about if they're non-binary, it's about why. Most times, when I see someone being corrected on Kris's pronouns, it's not that they haven't been told before. They just proceed to say, oh well, I would see Kris as a boy, or on rare occasions, well, I prefer to see Kris as a girl. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care. Whether it be from blatant transphobia, or more subtle and internalized transphobia, like why does it bother you so much to have a non-binary protagonist, or whether it comes from apathy or from projection, it all has this quiet, underlying question beneath it all. Okay, but why does Kris being non-binary even matter? Now, I mean, there are many reasons it matters. I can list the amount of non-binary characters I know on my hands, and multiple of them come from the same damn games. Representation is beautiful and important. Erasure is real and painful. But I'm not here to talk about that either. I'm here to talk about how Kris being non-binary matters both narratively and thematically, and why it matters very, very much. Like I said earlier, there are two very big themes in Deltarune that we've seen so far: identity and freedom. Well, maybe more accurately, this fight between them. Less identity and freedom, and more identity versus freedom. And your gender is a part of your identity. Kris's gender is a part of their identity. And Kris's identity is very, very significant. There's so much to unpack about Kris and their identity. The primary ways that we learn about them and their character are very interesting, because, well, first off, we're possessing them, and second off, we're already starting at a very biased perspective with a lot of expectations. And controlling Kris can make the lines between us blurry at best sometimes. Most characterization we get from them comes from more quiet reactions and decisions. How they choose to say the words we put in their mouth, for instance. "Join you?" said incredulously. The ways that they decide to toast to the queen, that kind of thing. To, bigger reactions, like protecting Susie, or, most notably, freaking out after Spanton. And one of the biggest avenues of characterization, especially in Chapter 2, is how people talk about them. People commenting on how out of character it is for them to be the social, Toriel saying that they wanted horns, Noelle talking about the myriad of pranks they would play on her, etc. We don't exactly get to see Kris in a normal environment, only anecdotes of what they were like in that environment. We also get to see what Kris isn't like by, acting not like them. And by that I mean the Snow Grape route. Noelle clearly notices that something is deeply, deeply, deeply wrong, so at least we know Kris wouldn't psychologically torture their friends. Yippee! So, regardless of how we get the characterization, it's still very much so there. And regardless of how much we control them, Kris still shines through the cracks. Kris is alive, and they will make themselves heard one way or another. And one of the things we actually get quite a bit of evidence for is that Kris has struggles with their identity far beyond just the possession problem. And, I'll just go right out and say it. Every single struggle, or at least most of the struggles, that Kris has with identity, and by extension freedom, can be seen through a trans lens. Let's go over them one by one, shall we? At least, the most important ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But first, a word from our sponsor. Just kidding, I am broke as fuck, and so is my best friend, Sunny, a young trans man trying to get out of an abusive household and into college. The link to his GoFundMe is in the description, so please donate if you can. Sorry, back to the video. 1. Dysphoria. Kris seems to have a complicated at best relationship with their humanity. On one hand, they were comfortable enough with it as a kid to use it for pranks. On the other, the headband. But those are both anecdotes from the past. In present day time, one of the few acknowledgments and shows of emotion that we get from Kris about humanity is when they slam the book on it shut as soon as they see another human. Debatably, there's also their search history, where they look up how to do magic. On one hand, magic doesn't really seem to exist in the light world, and if it does, it's at least far less powerful. On the other, so far it's still been confined to only monsters. And, ironically, it is hard to shake the instinct that Undertale has ingrained in me that only monsters can do magic. It hasn't been outright said that humans can't do it, but who knows, I guess. So Kris looking up magic tricks could be another way for them to feel more like a monster, or it could just be them looking up magic tricks. At least the book with the picture is actually more clear. But those past anecdotes still remain some of the strongest details that were given. In particular, the headband. I think it's certainly one of the most telling details we have of this puzzle yet. We know, for certain, that Kris, at some point, wanted to be more monster than human. Kris knew they were a human. I don't think it's something Hometown would shy away from mentioning, and they actively used it to prank Noelle, but knowing something doesn't make it feel right. Being told what you are doesn't automatically make you connect to it. It's likely that Kris also wants to be like Azriel, from the horns to the trophies. Kris was taken in by the Dreamers at a young enough age to internalize monstrosity as a part of their identity, not humanity. Every single person in their family has horns. So why don't they? Why are they the odd one out? When are their horns gonna grow in? It's that cognitive dissonance you get when you look in a mirror. Is that really you, or is it just what they call you? It's a feeling of discomfort, of disconnection, of disassociation from their too human, too wrong body. It's a feeling of dysphoria. In God Love Little Kris, they wore that headband for months. We don't know why they stopped. We can only theorize about it. And oh ho ho, have we theorized about that fuck-ass headband. Speaking of which, there's a pretty damn good case for Rase being the horns headband, I will admit. His own horns are pink, much like a faded old red might have become. And, obviously he looks just like fucking Azriel. His name is an anagram of Azriel. He has a noticeable and slightly concerning fixation/fondness for Kris, and much like all the other protagonists in this godforsaken game, he has some mega identity issues. In his own words, he doesn't even know what being Rase-like actually is. There's a lot to be said about the Fluffmeister, enough that he's worthy of a complete video of his own. It's debatable whether he's even an object at all as the Prince of Darkness, and I actually have a lot of opinions about the difference between him and other Darkners, including that he might be / have a shadow crystal, particularly in his glasses, but that is besides the point! For now, I simply bring up that regardless of if he's the headband or not, I do think he shows quite a few of Kris's identity issues that are worth bringing up. He's a lovable goat child, soft and sweet and palatable, and everything that Kris will never, ever be. If Rouse is truly a representation of Kris's identity issues, and I believe that he is, woohoo boy does that have some implications. From what we've seen, Kris and Rouse aren't really anything alike. But is it what they want to be like? Did they wish it once, to see him in the mirror, but no longer? There's also the question of whether or not Kris even likes Rouse, what with the T theory, which has its strengths and weaknesses, I will admit, though personally I lean closer to the drama of, them not liking him. I feel like that has so much potential. Whatever. So they wanted to look like a goat monster, and it's quite possible and quite likely that they're insecure about not being more like Azzy. They're not soft and accomplished, and in their biased perspective, maybe they're just not lovable. This is getting a little away from me, though. The point is that Kris has dysphoria about being human. Moving on. 2. Alienation. Kris is a loner, at least at the start of the game. They don't seem to really have any friends. What we've gotten of them from Noelle's blog posts and stories also speak to them being disconnected, I guess, from other people. Apathetic? I'm not quite sure how to put it. But something about the Susie anecdote where she threatens to eat them like an apple, which is kind of gay if you ask me, speaks of loneliness to me. All three of our heroes in the prophecy are implied to be quite lonely. With Susie and Rouse, that's more obvious, even if it comes across in different ways. Rouse never had any friends before because he never had anyone even around before, and Susie was alone, even in crowds of people. This is a group of kids who have been so lonely, learning to find solidarity, understanding, and loving each other. It hits a little different when you read them all as queer. Susie, who definitely likes other girls. Kris, non-binary. Rouse, who would definitely get called a faggot in the locker room and then have to try not to cry in the stall. All three of them feel like maybe no one will ever really understand them. Maybe no one really wants to try. But as they get to know each other and have that idea challenged, it makes them realize maybe they don't even know themselves. But maybe someone out there is willing to know them. Being trans, and queer in general, can feel pretty isolating, at least until you find your people. P.S. To any lonely little queer kid watching this, I promise, you will find your people. Kris is noticeably different from everyone else. And notably, they have a secret, or at the very least, something hidden. No one knows they're possessed, even if they're screaming out about it as loud as they can. If you're queer, I'm sure I don't need to explain why I feel this is relatable. This fear that everyone you love doesn't actually know the real you, doesn't love the real you. What if they like this fake version better? Is it better for everyone if you keep pretending to be something you're not? Or will it only make things worse? It's a very lonely way to live. They're the only human in Hometown. They're possessed, they're not good with people, they're alienated. There's no way around it. Kinda reminds you of being one of, if not the only, trans kid you know, doesn't it? 3. Expectation. This section is dedicated to all of the people who still debate on whether or not Kris is Kara or Frisk, because it is low-key driving me fucking crazy how so many people still believe Kris is Kara. So, to cope with it, I added this entire section in a fit of hysteria. So it seems it's finally time. Time for the Deltarune analysis to talk about Undertale. Misty Sparkles put it best in their video. I'm sorry, Misty Sparkles, they don't know the pronouns. On who and why Gaster matters, I think. Undertale is context for Deltarune. Any Deltarune fan is also inevitably an Undertale fan. I'm not sure if the game still does this, but I remember the first time that I ever got Deltarune, and it told the player outright that this was a game intended for people who finished Undertale. It is not quite a prequel or a sequel. As far as we know, the game's stories don't have any real impact on each other. It's just context. very, very important context. When you go into Deltarune, you have a lot of expectations. Of course you do. It's the spiritual successor to fucking Undertale, made by Toby fucking Fox. You're expecting beautiful music, rich stories, and fun gameplay. You're expecting intriguing world building and zany, quirky jokes. You're expecting to have a little heart-shaped object, no shit, that you use to dodge bullets with. You're expecting the bright art style. You're expecting something that plays with the fourth wall until your brain chemistry changes forever. You're expecting that every single little choice you make will be remembered and called out, and not just that, but that it will matter. Because they sure fucking did in Undertale, and that is our only point of reference on what to expect here. You can try to get your hopes down instead of up at first, but still, there's this anticipation. It's inescapable, and Toby knows this. He uses this. I don't blame anyone for thinking that Kris is Kara at first. I was one of them, actually. Hell, the first time I played Deltarune and saw Kris, I literally shouted, "We're Kara!" out loud. But as you progress further into the game, that initial perception fades and morphs. It particularly starts to hit in the Dark World, where your expectations are flipped on their head and played with. A whole new UI with new mechanics, saves that look different. Hell, even new text boxes. This game is not Undertale. This game is Deltarune, with its own unique identity. There are lots of little things you notice about Kris that contribute to the question that you inevitably have. Is this Frisk or Kara? After all, their name is a combination of the two. They wear Kara's sweater, and they're Azriel's sibling, so it must be Kara, right? But their skin and hair color are much closer to Frisk's, and in the Dark World their scarf has the same color palette as Frisk's clothes. Yes, they like chocolate and are mischievous and creepy, all traits of Kara, but there are definite Frisk traits too, like eating musk, being skilled at flirting, and the constant death stare. One of the very first big Kris-only traits that we get is the anecdote about the Horn's Headband. It's very good for cementing Kris as a unique character who we're still learning about. But still, it might not have fully processed yet, even if you haven't learned it over the chapter. And then, of course, they do something Frisk and Kara never, ever did. They tear out their soul. And it really hits you. Kris is not Frisk or Kara. Kris is not the player. Kris is completely and solely their own. It's so visceral, especially the first time you see it. As you fruitlessly bang against the walls of the cage that they've thrown you in, the whole game gets recontextualized. It makes replaying Chapter 1 with that knowledge very fun, and you go into Chapter 2 full of anticipation and curiosity. Because, dear God, do you want to know Kris? You want to know how they wound up possessed. You want to know how they feel about it. You want to know how much they fight it. You want to know who they really are. Everything about Kris and how we meet them is soaked in expectation. Even for the characters, Kris can't escape it. Rouse particularly is a good example, as he expects great heroism from them, much as he expected great heroism from Susie. For the other monsters in Hometown, Kris isn't just Kris. They're the token human, or they're Azriel's little sibling, or they're the weird kid. And for the player, well, whether it's the expectation of Undertale, or the expectation of a normal game avatar, both are flipped on their heads. I think a fairly good comparison, actually, could be Cult of the Lamb. It's a wonderful game, very fun, and you play as, well, the lamb. Your actions are theirs. Their actions are yours. You can project onto them. As far as I've seen in the game, that's what you're supposed to do. It's immersive, and it's fun. And of course, the game refers to them with they, them pronouns. I don't think this means it's really canon that the lamb is non-binary, though. I think it's just another way to make it easier for the player to project onto them. So I don't get insulted when people refer to them with solely he, him pronouns, or on occasion she, her. I acknowledge that my personal headcanon of the lamb being non-binary / gender fluid is just that, a headcanon. Not an unpopular one, not at all, at least not in the circles of fandom that I frequent. But I don't think that you're ignoring any part of the game if you don't believe that, you know? This is an example of a game where you can choose your vessel's gender, where you're supposed to use them as a self-insert. Deltarune is not that game! It spins this common video game trope of gender neutrality as a means for projection into another way of expressing Kris's individuality. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of a sort. Basically, when people ignore their gender and decide it for them, they're ironically doing the exact same thing that Kris is fighting against. It's a way of saying, hey, here's a normal video game puppet for you to project onto. Just kidding, they're their own character who actually uses they-them not for relatability, but because that's just who they are. And I think that for some people, that kind of hurts the relatability, maybe. Which again, is quite ironic. For me and other trans people, though, it also ironically makes Kris more relatable. So Kris being non-binary is a direct spin on the average player's expectations. In universe, it could also be a further symptom of how Kris usually defies expectations. People expect a normal child, and then they meet this weird human who uses they-them instead. It's about autonomy. It's about the freedom to choose who you are regardless of what others think you to be. It's about freedom. Isn't it all about freedom, in the end? So many of Kris's problems circle back to that. It's arguably the most crucial aspect of their character. Kris wants to be free, and they are willing to fight for it. Kris's fight for freedom doesn't stop at the possession, and it didn't start there, either. Freedom goes hand in hand with identity. It's a fight for autonomy. And like every other aspect of their character, it is fully recontextualized under a trans lens. Autonomy is a human right, and transition is a question of autonomy. But even beyond the struggle to be yourself in a world that doesn't want you to be, there is another internal fight. The struggle to be yourself when you don't want to be. Do you choose to be yourself, or does yourself leak through the cracks no matter what you do? All this to say, being trans is an interesting experience when it comes to the concept of freedom. It's simultaneously something that you get zero say in, and yet it's an intense self-actualization. Realizing I was trans made me feel more helpless than ever before or since, and accepting it has never made me feel more free. I don't think I really have to detail out every step for you to see the comparisons that I'm drawing here. There's almost too many to list, really. And if I may, since Deltarune is still incomplete, we're not given thematic answers just yet. We're only really given questions. It feels, I don't know, uncreative to just list them all out, though that sure as hell won't stop me. I think the best themes, though, are also the ones that don't have a concrete black and white thing going on. The best questions a story can raise are just that. Questions, not pre-packaged answers. The conversation is the point. The debate and analysis are what give it life. The existence and paradox of Kris Dreamer raises many of these such questions. How much of yourself do you get to choose? How much of your identity lies in other people's perception of you? Identity versus freedom. What does it mean to exist? Hey man, wouldn't it be, fucked up if you were possessed? I also want to bring up the ways in which Kris fights for freedom. It's in the little things. How they choose to say the words we put in their mouth. How they close their eyes when we try to look in Asriel's room. Sometimes when you can't find any control in your life, you really do have to hang on to all the little things with all your might. It's all that you can do. But the most vivid and important way that they fight for freedom is when they tear out their soul. Trigger warning for self-harm, baby, woohoo! Yes, I believe with my full chest that this not only can be read as self-harm, but that it is intended that way too. Kris is desperate. They want their body to feel like theirs. They want to be free of the weight of their life and expectations. They want to feel in control for once. All of these are very real reasons that people, trans or not, self-harm. A lot of the aspects of the soul tearing are suspicious at best. The fact that they just do this sometimes, according to Toriel. The fact that they have their own knife and use it mostly in this context. The fact that tearing it out almost looks like they're forcing a battle to start. The fact that, by God, it looks like it fucking hurts. So that's one coping mechanism they've got. What's the other? Escapism. People have pointed out that the dark worlds can easily be read as a metaphor for escapism, and I agree. And Kris seems to genuinely like them. They sound genuine enough that Susie shares in their excitement in Chapter 2. They have a lot of positive experiences in the dark worlds, and they don't have to be Kris Dreamer there. They can just be Kris, hero of the legend. I know they're still possessed and it's complicated, but work with me here, you see the vision. Of course, you could also bring up the fact that they're heavily implied to be the knight, and we know that even if they're not, they've created at least one fountain. But their motivations become quite murky when you think about it more. The fact that they slash the tires so that Toriel will call the police. The far more damning fact that even on the Snowgrave route, they still open the fountain. But we're getting off topic. The point is that once again, all of this gets recontextualized under a trans lens. Plenty of trans people use the exact same coping mechanisms to deal with their own problems. Kris being non-binary is an inarguable, undeniable part of their fight for freedom, and that fight is the most important part of Kris we see. To ignore it is to ignore everything the game is building up so far. It invalidates Kris's individuality. It spits on their fight. Kris being their own is an unavoidable fact. Not being able to name them matters. Not being able to pick their gender matters. It's their identity, it's their freedom, and it's their fight. It matters that they're their own person. It matters that they're fighting. It matters that they're a prankster who likes chocolate and wants horns. Every bit of their personhood is significant. The ways that they fight for it are significant. Their individuality is integral. That's why Kris being non-binary matters. I just wanted to say thank you if you've made it this far and watched this whole thing. It's my first ever video essay, and not gonna lie, I got quite a bit lazy and rushed with it, so it feels very messy and disjointed to me. The pacing is off. So, I'm sorry for that, but I tried. I just really needed to get this out of my system, and I especially wanted to get it out before chapters 3 and 4. I'm so fucking excited. I don't really know if this will change anyone's mind, per se, but I hope that it can give words to the people who can't articulate why Kris's identity is so important to them, and broaden understanding about their individuality and gender in the fandom in general. There's a lot to unpack about Kris and Deltarune, so while this sometimes spiraled out of control, I tried to mostly keep it tied to the gender thing. Maybe one day I'll do a larger, better analysis. Obligatory, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, blah 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 blah. I thank you again and bid you farewell, fair viewer, with these final words. Deltarune tomorrow, Deltarune tomorrow, Deltarune tomorrow, Deltarune tomorrow, Deltarune tomorrow.